I want to bring up RFK Jr. You tweeted out just a couple of weeks ago, as someone who spoke with and met him, this is when he was having a conversation with Crystal Ball on Breaking Points, and he called the Palestinian people the most pampered people, and really, truly has just defended Israel at every turn, even with everything that has gone on and everything that we have seen, and even the charges of genocide against them from South Africa, which the 84-page document is very damning. And he still is defending Israel as somebody who has the Children's Health Defense Organization protecting children, and then seeing thousands of children killed in Israel. So you tweeted out, as someone who spoke with and met him before he launched his presidential campaign, including about more troubling aspects of Zionist history like the Stern Gang, I have a hard time believing this is his genuine stance and not a forced one. I have a hard time believing this isn't a forced stance also. I have a hard time believing he genuinely feels this way. Of course he could, but it's hard to imagine because he's been so quick to point out like deep state stuff, right? So quick to point out the bad actors in all of our 3-letter agencies and everything that's gone on. And then for this, he just seems to turn a total blind eye. What do you think the influence is? What are your thoughts on him? And you have spoken to him about this, so what do you make of it?
Yeah, I can't say for sure exactly why he's taking this posture, but based on my conversations with him before he launched his candidacy, I find it hard to believe. First of all, in the case of the assassination of his father, Robert F. Kennedy, RFK Jr. is known for believing that Sirhan Sirhan was not the gunman. He's a supporter of Lisa Peace's work, whose book on the assassination of RFK I could not recommend more strongly. It's very, very detailed. And essentially, if you know that Sirhan Sirhan was not the gunman of RFK and that it was someone else, likely affiliated with the CIA, per Lisa Peace's work, the reasoning that was given to the public about why Sirhan Sirhan did it was about the Israel-Palestine issue.
Right.
And then you have Rabbi Shmuley, who has sort of constantly accompanied RFK Jr. when he has made these particular statements, at least in the beginning, though he's, of course, done it since without him. But Shmuley has brought up this claim that, RFK was assassinated for supporting Israel. Well, RFK Jr. would have to know that that isn't accurate. In addition, we were talking once when I was invited on his podcast to talk about an article I did about the CIA in Ukraine in the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. And he asked me something to the effect of, why would a Jewish president, Zelensky, willingly ally with Azov Battalion, a neo-Nazi group? And I brought up the Stern Gang, how the Stern Gang had attempted to ally with Nazi Germany during the Holocaust in order to advance the Zionist objective of establishing a Jewish ethno-state in Palestine. And he was aware of who the Stern Gang was aware of that, but claimed that it happened before or not during the Holocaust, but that's actually not true. But anyway, if you're aware of who the Stern Gang is, then you would have to know that the Stern Gang, the leader of it, Itzhak Shamir, became prime minister of Israel in the 1980s. The Stern Gang self-defined themselves as a terrorist group. They used terror, by their own admission, in the mass murder of Palestinian civilians in order to ethnically cleanse Palestine. That was, one of their several objectives, and they were an outgrowth of the group called Irgun, whose leader was Menachem Begin when he went on to create the Beirut Party, the precursor to Likud. He also, and essentially, the former leaders of Irgun and the Stern Gang are what run Israel today. And their ideological lineage goes back to a man named Zev Jabotinsky, who was directly influenced by Mussolini-style fascism, and sought to create Israel in that ethno-fascist model specifically. So if you're someone like RFK Jr. and you claim to stand against fascism and racism, it's very hard to genuinely believe and mean that, and support, Likud party politics, which since its inception has been steeped in in fascism and this feeling of ethno-supremacy, which, frankly, if you're against ethno-supremacism, whether you should be consistently against it.
Right.
You should say fascism is always bad. Ethno-supremacy, specifically, when it's combined with fascism, is bad. I think we all learned that during World War II, right? So if those are bad, they should be bad in Israel as well.
Right.
And now we're at a point where we're being told that being against Likud party politics and policies is anti-Semitic. That's insane. It's not even anti-Zionist to say that. Early Zionism was dominated by like labor Zionism. Even early writings of Jabotinsky argue for equal rights for Arabs and for Palestinians. And that is not equal. That is not the policy of Israel's current government.
Yeah.
So it's either saying, if you don't agree with the current policies of the current Israeli government, you're an anti-Semite. I mean, that is absolutely ludicrous. And really, anyone towing that line who claims to be against fascism and ethno-supremacy cannot really hold those views, in my opinion.
Right.
So it's either that, he doesn't really stand against fascism, or he's okay with it happening in Israel, in which case he's okay with it happening sometimes and he's not really against it. When we met before, had the impression that he was, a man of principle, largely because of his work and advocacy with COVID and because of the good reputation of Children's Health Defense, an organization I very much support their work. And I just find it very disappointing. And I also think that there is a broader effort to sort of use figures that cultivated a significant amount of trust in the COVID era, and sort of now that this is happening with the Israel-Hamas situation, to sort of lead them back to neoconservative foreign policy. And unfortunately, I think RFK is being used for those ends, whether it's voluntary or involuntary on his part.
I mean, and there's a lot of speculation, of course, like why is he doing, if it's not really truly his genuine belief, which it could always still be, why would he do it? We do have him being on Epstein's flights. Rabbi Shmuley is also a very weird character, right? This guy is like, he has a long career. Sex is kind of how he's made a lot of his money, is off of the sex industry. Kosher Sex, was an advisor for Michael Jackson and was, I guess, counseling him for a long time, and then turned because so there's a lot of, so Shmuley's like an odd character in the sex world. You've got RFK Jr. having been on Epstein's plane. It could also just be the idea of, I can't win an election unless I'm pro-Israel, right? It could just be the political of, that could be the motivation.
But
right
I don't know if it's that, because you have people that took sort of middle of the road lines. For example, Ron Paul's views on Israel, and
but he didn't
there's
win.
other candidates that sort of took. No, well, okay, fair enough, yeah. But I think it would have been possible to have not taken. I mean, honestly, the position RFK Jr. has taken on Israel is not even the norm within the Democratic Party. It's honestly, as a colleague of mine, Sam Husseini, once said, it's to the right of Newt Gingrich, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, to call the Palestinian people the most pampered, as they're literally buried under
that's
rubble.
Absurd.
Totally absurd. Yeah. So do you think that there was anything, you've talked to him about the Epstein flights. He's been on them twice.
Yes.
Do you think that there was anything there to that?
So he explained them to me, and he told me there were 2 flights, and then he, I don't know if it was him or one of his campaign people, went and told Newsweek it was 1 flight, and then it became 2 flights again. And what he has said since about the 2 flights is pretty much exactly what he told me. He told me that he met Epstein and Ghislaine through his wife, Mary Richardson, and I was able to corroborate aspects of that. But I also wrote in my book that Ghislaine Maxwell in the early 90s, really before her father's death, before the death of Robert Maxwell, was essentially being used by Robert Maxwell. He was trying to get her to marry a Kennedy. And so there was a lot of activity of Ghislaine around the Kennedy family, with JFK Jr., with RFK Jr., and with RFK Jr.'s older brother. And she was also, for example, a guest at the Kerry Kennedy wedding to Andrew Cuomo. And was invited from the Kerry Kennedy side of that, not the Cuomo side of that. So there was a lot of I guess, intermingling between Ghislaine Maxwell and the Kennedy clan in that particular point in time. And unfortunately, I found something out after my book was already going to print that I couldn't include and that I haven't been able to question RFK Jr. about. But there's images of him at Ghislaine Maxwell's apartment, I believe in 2014, 2015, but it seems to have been related to some sort of environmental advocacy thing, since at the time he was an environmentally focused lawyer, and she was involved in sort of her environmental overtures and nonprofits like Terramar. So obviously there was some sort of continuing relationship, at least with Ghislaine Maxwell, beyond that. Was it just in the world of philanthropy? Like I said, I haven't been able to ask him about it, but it isn't something that just ended forever in the mid 90s. And as far as what he told me, when he discussed how he felt about Epstein and what he observed, he definitely did portray Ghislaine in sort of a much more sympathetic light and portrayed Epstein in a negative way. And unfortunately, that's his account, or the account that he wanted to portray. And I, can report that he said that, but I can't corroborate his, details of that, or exactly where they went. Did they really go on a fossil trip? Were his children on board and all of that? But frankly, I think it's quite well known at this point that RFK Jr. had a troubled youth, and that if someone were to want to blackmail him with something, it wouldn't necessarily have required something like going on Epstein's plane.
Right.
Because frankly, if intelligence services,
and that's been well known. Yeah.
Yeah. So if intelligence services want to blackmail someone, they'll go about it any number of different ways. And again, I don't know if RFK is taking this because he was necessarily blackmailed. There could be many different motivations behind it, but obviously the Epstein connection has got people thinking about that, and it's definitely within the realm of possibility. And I definitely feel that way, given what appears to me to be sort of the forced nature of the stance. And again, I find it very disappointing, and I think it, unfortunately, the extreme partisanship has done a lot of damage to the health freedom movement, and I find that very regrettable.
Well, and to point out that there was 4 adults supposedly on the flights, were his children as well. We don't know, but there were 4 adults on those flights. 2 of them are dead. So we can't ask those 2, right? His ex-wife is dead and Epstein's dead. And one of them's in jail. So, and the other one's running for president. So, so there's a lot of unanswered questions there. Also, I think it's important to point out that Epstein's not the only operation, even within the Epstein circle. I mean, you could have had no actual interaction with Epstein himself and still been involved through, like, Jean-Luc, Jean-Luc
Brunel.
Yeah, Jean-Luc Brunel, who's also dead. Can't ask him any questions.
Nope.
So there's layers of people who one could have been connected to and still ended up somehow blackmailed, or even if it's not blackmail. But if it's just, as you mentioned, the infiltration of all of the big money industry, I mean, the tech, there's so much big money that is infiltrated that if you want money for your campaign, if you want to continue, you've got a lot of forces around you who are saying you have to be pro-Israel, or we're going to pull our funding from you. We're not going to support your campaign, or we're not interested in endorsing you or something. So there's a lot of power around that. It doesn't have to be some seedy blackmail. But yeah, his past does make it also, this is a guy that he was not an upstanding character forever. He had a very bad past. That's well known. He was a bad guy, I would say, for a long time when it came to his sexcapades and drugs, right? So it's not hard when somebody's involved in that lifestyle to then get them to do more and to compromise them. But I think a lot of the blackmail is in my opinion, I think it's a lot easier to blackmail somebody if you're going after somebody they love, like their children. If you could blackmail their kids, I think you could then get them more likely to cave. If you can get somebody that they care about, who they feel like, it's not they never chose politics. It's not, it's not them.
I mean, intelligence agencies will study someone about the best way to blackmail them.
Right, of course.
I think a lot of Epstein targets were identified as people that would be susceptible to that type of activity, but obviously there are people that they want to blackmail that are not. And how do you get those people to cooperate with you? There's a lot of strategies. And
I don't know how we get out from under this. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, how do we get out from under this now? If we have an entire nation under blackmail, then what in the world? How are we going to stop this? I mean, blackmail is. What do we do?
Well, that necessitates examining our current situation to an extent. So, this particular group leading things, this transnational group that I write about a lot in my books and try and delineate, is pushing for things like digital ID, for AI to essentially run the internet, for programmable, surveillable money, and essentially herding us into a broad, interoperable global system of control that I think your audience is aware of and also uninterested in living under. So when you realize those are the stakes, and you realize that the people running this and creating this are not good people, the only solution is to build something new. And in the case of Silicon Valley and big tech, I've written about for a long time that you can no longer tell where big tech ends and intelligence begins. Their national security state and big tech are completely fused. And big tech, those same big tech oligarchs finance the lion's share of our politicians. So I think a big first step is to divest from big tech products, because they
That's
view
tough.
our dependence on them as a
Yeah.
weakness. And a lot of their ambitions are contingent on us continuing to use their systems, when in reality there are a lot of talented developers, a lot of open source alternatives out there. People just have to go looking for them. My website Unlimited Hangout recently published a guide by Ramiro Romani, who also sells de-googled phones and other things, but also has a list of things that will cost you nothing that can help you begin at least to divest from these companies. We have to start taking responsibility and not just sit back in our armchair and continue to use these services and enriching these companies and these people who were trying to enslave us, essentially.